Zelenskyy will speak with Putin. Everything will be decided face-to-face. A real diplomatic bomb. Two key issues regarding peace are on the agenda. A barrage of super weapons from France. This will crush the enemy. The Crimean Bridge shook with tremendous force. Fear and panic is spreading across the peninsula. An unpredictable and terrifying strike by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Is Trump attacking Iran? Why did the US president send yet another armada of warships there? Ukraine is finally breaking into the EU. The date is already on the table. Documents are ready, decisions are being shaped. Belarus is cracking from the inside. Lukashenko is being taken down. Zelenskyy has already met with the opposition. The plan is on the table. The dictator is closer to isolation or collapse than ever before. Orban is in full panic mode. Elections loom, power is slipping away. Wanting to survive at all costs, he blames Ukraine. But for what? Let's break down what's happening right now. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. Maria Farafonova here with the latest updates. Zelenskyy is ready to meet with Putin to resolve the two most sensitive issues. Ukraine's foreign minister Andriy Sybiha said in an interview that two matters remain unresolved within the peace process: the issue of territories and the future of the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
We are counting on the signing of a 20-point peace plan, but the issues of territories and the Zaporizhzhia NPP still remain unresolved. Zelenskyy is ready to meet with Putin and discuss this. It is expected that the bilateral document will be signed by the US and Ukraine, and then by the US and Russia.
However, the minister notes that the European side is also with us. It is present in the peace process and in the arrangements of security guarantees. Importantly, for the first time, the discussion is explicitly about the term security guarantees, not assurances or anything similar.
It is also fundamentally important that the fundamental things that are of decisive importance for Ukraine and for our security have a legally binding nature. Therefore, it is important that there is agreement on the need for ratification of the guarantees, in particular, their ratification by the U.S. Congress. There is another fundamental element: boots on the ground. That is the presence of foreign troops.
Sybiha did not stop there. He emphasized that another fundamental element is a deterrence package. The Russian regime must clearly understand the consequences of any potential violation of peace. To this end, Ukraine needs, among other things, self-sufficiency in producing air defense systems and long-range weapons. And one more element that is fundamental for us: Ukraine's membership in the EU is itself an element of security guarantees. Even more support from France. Ukraine's Minister of Defense Mikhailo Fedorov held a phone call with his French counterpart Catherine Vautrin. Fedorov said they discussed the supply of ammunition to Ukraine for SAMPT and Crowtail air defense systems, as well as long-range capabilities. During the conversation, the sides also discussed the possibility of transferring additional Mirage fighter jets to Ukraine. The minister emphasized that such deliveries would significantly strengthen Ukraine's air capabilities.
I am grateful for the readiness to transfer additional French-made missiles in the near future.
The minister also thanked France for its principled stance in countering Russia's so-called shadow fleet and for long-standing military technical cooperation. According to Fedorov, France's contribution to the development of Ukraine's air defense and aviation capabilities is already having a practical effect and is directly working to protect Ukrainian skies.
Ukraine can count on France.
Crimea is shaken. Ukrainian Armed Forces drones have broken into the peninsula. Powerful explosions were heard by the occupiers in Sevastopol and near the Saki and Belbek airfields. Panic has erupted across Telegram channels with frantic attempts to count how many strikes actually hit. And now the first results of the attack are emerging.
Drones attacked an oil depot in Feodosia, a subscriber reports.
The Crimean Bridge was urgently shut down. 7 hours of total fear and uncertainty over whether the structure would hold this time. Meanwhile, local authorities are trying to project calm. Sevastopol is pretending everything is under control.
Over the past night and morning, the Ukrainian Armed Forces attempted to attack Sevastopol twice. In total, Air Defense Forces and our Black Sea Fleet shot down 10 UAVs.
But Russians are no strangers to this anymore. Our defenders are methodically eliminating the enemy. The day before, Ukraine's defense forces struck a Russian Tor M2 surface-to-air missile system. The Russian air defense system collapsed right before the occupiers' eyes. And it looks like this is only the beginning. Donald Trump has sent yet another armada of U.S. warships toward Iran. The U.S. president stated that the Iran should have made a deal from the very beginning.
In June, we destroyed Iran's nuclear potential during Operation Midnight Hammer. People had been waiting for this for 22 years. They were a month away from obtaining nuclear weapons. We had to do it. Now another beautiful armada is heading toward Iran. I truly hope, that they make a deal.
Since late 2025, large-scale anti-government protests have been ongoing in Iran. They began in Tehran with people dissatisfied with the economic situation and the collapse of the national currency. Even regions that had previously been considered loyal to the current regime have joined the protests. On January 22nd, Trump announced that the United States had sent a large number of warships to Iran in response to the suppression of mass protests. By January 26th, the U.S. aircraft carrier strike group USS Abraham Lincoln had moved into the Indian Ocean and is now operating within the area of responsibility of U.S. Central Command, with overseas military operations in the Middle East. At the same time, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, amid fears of the possible U.S. strike, was hiding in an underground bunker. In 2027, Ukraine will become a member of the European Union. These are the conditions for ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. This was stated to journalists by Serbian President Vučić. What is being said in the Kremlin, and what would EU membership bring to Kyiv? More on this in our report.
In 2027, Ukraine will become a member of the European Union. This unexpected statement was made by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. According to him, Ukraine's accelerated accession to the European Union is part of a possible peace plan between Kyiv and Moscow.
I'm telling you what I heard somewhere, and I wouldn't be telling you this if it weren't true. So I found out that part of the plan is a peace plan if Russia and Ukraine reach it, because not only will both sides be obliged to implement it, but also a significant part of the international community. One part of the plan is for Ukraine to become a member of the European Union.
We're talking about an unprecedentedly fast scenario of European integration, with Ukraine joining the EU as early as January 1st, 2027.
These are absolutely unrealistic timeframes. Absolutely. There are no such plans in the European Union, and it's also important to keep in mind that it's far from certain that an agreement to end the war between Russia and Ukraine will be reached in 2026.
Moreover, talk of Ukraine's accelerated accession to the EU is most likely just part of a deliberate fake information and political campaign by Kremlin allies. In particular, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán is using this topic ahead of the elections.
This is clearly one of his dark, dirty, and sinister pre-election tactics. To scare Hungarians with the idea that Ukraine will supposedly be fast-tracked into the European Union and that all the benefits, preferences and subsidies, the EU's agricultural subsidies, will go only to Ukraine. Why is the president of Serbia, who has a special relationship with Russia, just like Orban, repeating this? Because Serbia also wants to be in the European Union, but it doesn't want to play by European rules.
But what is actually real in 2027 is Ukraine's readiness to join the European Union. According to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, it is important for Kyiv to secure a specific date for joining the EU directly in the agreement to end the war. According to him, this will make it possible to obtain clear security guarantees and avoid the potential blocking of membership.
One of the security guarantees for Ukraine is membership in the European Union, and that's exactly why we always say the year 27. Itaro says by the year 30.
As of today, 2030 is a more realistic date. The European Commission emphasizes that despite the war, Ukraine is showing significant progress. The European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, previously stated that Kyiv is actively implementing reforms and should become an EU member, as soon as possible, provided all necessary conditions are met. This position is also confirmed by European Commission representative Guillaume Mercier. According to him, Ukraine has already completed the legislative screening, is making progress in key areas, and has adopted important roadmaps, from the rule of law to public administration reform and the protection of minority rights.
We need to go through all the procedures. For example, Hungary even blocked the opening of the first clusters. But negotiations have started anyway, substantive negotiations, and then it will just be a matter of formalizing things legally, the opening and closing of these clusters, of which there are 30 in total. There are about 3.5 dozen negotiation clusters. This also takes time, usually 2 to 3 years. Then comes the political decision of the European Union, the consent of the European Commission, the European Council, and after that, ratification by each EU country. As for Russia's position, Russia is categorically opposed to Ukraine's membership in NATO. But now official Russian representatives are showing, let's say, some flexibility here.
For Ukraine, EU membership is not only a step toward economic development, but also a symbol of a final break with the Soviet past, and under the current conditions of war, an indirect guarantee of security.
Yes, the European Union is not a military political bloc, it is not a military alliance, but nevertheless, it is a political union. If Russia attacks Ukraine, well, the European Union is already helping us now. Right now, it is our main partner, providing us with economic, financial, and military support. And if we become a part of it, then all the more so. Most EU countries are also members of NATO at the same time. This is a risk, maybe not a direct one, but an indirect risk for Russia of getting into a conflict with NATO. Secondly, Ukraine's membership in the European Union, as shown by the experience of many Eastern and Central European countries, especially Poland, a country joining the EU, receives quite significant economic benefits.
Ukraine continues to demonstrate its readiness for accelerated European integration, but the key question remains with Europe. Will the entire Union be able to agree on a specific date for membership? Today, there are countries that traditionally block the process: Hungary and Slovakia. They are the ones holding the keys to accelerated European integration. But the political map of Europe is not static. By 2030, elections will be held in these countries. Parliamentary seats may change, and with them, the positions of the blocking forces.
Lukashenko is living out his final days. In politics, his grip on power is weakening as Belarusian democratic forces intensify their efforts no longer acting alone. Ukraine has entered the equation, providing political support, coordination, and strategic backing behind the scenes. This is not a spontaneous crisis. It is a calculated process built step by step, aimed at ending Lukashenko's political era and holding his regime accountable for its actions. How exactly this operation is unfolding, who is involved, and why the moment is critical right now, all the details are in our report.
Ukraine has set its sights on Belarus. For the first time in years of war, Kiev is not just talking about democratic Belarus, but is starting to speak with it directly. On January 25th in Vilnius, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy held a full-fledged meeting with Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, head of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus, which is essentially a government in exile.
This was a politically calculated move that was meant to be heard. We are with you. With everyone who wants Belarus to be democratic, and something the regime in Minsk needed to hear.
For a long time, contacts with the democratic opposition of Belarus were effectively blocked. The office of the President of Ukraine operated on a simple logic: not to touch Lukashenko, so as not to provoke him into even more active participation in the war against Ukraine. It was believed that maintaining a cautious distance would at least preserve the illusion of Minsk's neutrality. But that illusion has crumbled. Belarus has become almost a full-fledged launchpad for the Russian invasion. Its territory is being used to deploy Russian troops and weaponry. And Lukashenko himself is becoming ever more deeply entangled in military and political dependence on the Kremlin.
Lukashenko's white Spitz has more rights than Belarusians. There was a chance in 2020 to change this, and I'm sure there will be another chance. But back then, there simply wasn't enough support for the Belarusians. And now we all feel just how much more difficult, more costly, and more dangerous Belarus's dependence on Moscow has become for all of us.
But the Vilnius meeting is not only about reassessing the past, but also about looking to the future. Right now, Lukashenko has a real chance to break out of international isolation. In the West, there are increasingly frequent signals about the possible partial lifting of sanctions and Minsk's return to diplomatic formats, all under the guise of peace initiatives and regional stabilization. For Ukraine, such a scenario is dangerous. Legitimizing Lukashenko means preserving a Russian military foothold on the northern borders and an attempt to freeze Belarus in the role of the Kremlin's vassal. For years to come,
Operators of Russian Shahed drones are acting against Ukraine, including from Belarusian territory. The coordination for these strikes is maintained from Belarusian territory. Russia is using Belarus as a testing ground to blackmail Europe and the world with threats. Belarusian industry is working for Russia's war effort, and its trade ties help Putin buy components needed to create threats against all of us in Europe.
That is why Kyiv is taking a preemptive step. According to media reports, Zelenskyy and Tikhanovskaya discussed specific mechanisms for deepening cooperation. From restoring a separate Belarusian direction in Ukrainian diplomacy to legal steps that could finally shut down Lukashenko, a path toward international rehabilitation. This includes the possible initiation of international criminal prosecution. For Ukraine, this is a way to eliminate the grey corridor of Russian influence at its borders.
To the people of Belarus, as Europeans, you stand united with our nations in a free and peaceful Europe, in a strong Europe, and you cannot be erased.
And while the West hesitates, Russians are increasingly absorbing Belarusians. 40 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, in the Gomel region, near the Yakimovka railway station, a new training ground is being built. The main construction work is scheduled for 2027 and 2028. With funding of $52.50 and $86 million respectively. At the same time, construction continues on a military town near the village of Pryborn in the Gomel district, where a new airborne assault brigade is planned to be stationed.
The deployment of such a base is, after all, a direct threat to Ukraine. And this is a signal to us that we must also prepare for possible scenarios of an offensive from Russia through Belarus, and possibly for the involvement of Belarusians in this process.
It seems that, for the first time in years, Belarusians have a real opportunity to break the shackles of Putin's regime and reclaim their freedom. To step out of Moscow's shadow, determine their own future, and build a Belarus that will be part of a free and democratic Europe.
Orban is fighting in agony, sensing his political demise and expected defeat in the upcoming elections. Putin's Hungarian ally is blaming Ukraine. What exactly he is accusing Kyiv of and why is coming up next.
Hungary is entering a new electoral cycle that could radically change the country's political landscape.
The pro-government, corrupt system is not interested in people's real problems and doesn't even dare to look them in the eye.
The parliamentary elections, scheduled for April 2026 for the first time in more than 15 years, pose a real threat to the power of Orbán's Fidesz party. Heavy artillery has been brought into play. The Prime Minister is frightening Hungarians with the prospect of war with Russia if his party loses the elections.
If we have a government supported by Brussels, they will drag us into war. If we have a national government, we still have a chance to avoid it.
To explain the drop in his party's ratings, the Prime Minister of Hungary began looking for someone to blame. To start with, he accused Ukraine of trying to interfere in the upcoming elections and summoned the ambassador to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Our national security agencies have analyzed this latest attack by Ukraine and concluded that these events are part of a coordinated series of measures by Ukraine aimed at interfering in the elections in Hungary. But we cannot allow anyone to jeopardize Hungary's sovereignty or the integrity of Hungarian elections.
The response from the Office of the President and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine was not long in coming.
Putin does not want peace, but wants the war to continue. Therefore, by blocking Ukraine's accession to the EU, Orban is fulfilling Putin's wishes, blocking the restoration of peace in the EU and making Hungary an accomplice of the Kremlin regime.
And the president's communications advisor, Dmytro Litvinov, published a photo of a 100-ruble Russian banknote. Orban is looking for a way to stay in power in Hungary regardless of the election results. He even tried to rewrite the laws, but he didn't succeed.
And with his anti-Ukrainian rhetoric, Orban definitely won't win.
Budapest under Orban's leadership is diverging from Brussels while simultaneously demonstrating political rapprochement with Moscow.
Now, when Russia and the Trump administration share a common goal to keep this government in power, I sincerely hope that the international community will pay attention to exposing any attempts at interference.
Opposition forces in the country are becoming noticeably more active. For the first time in many years, Orban has a rival who is truly capable of competing for power, the leader of the TISA party, Peter Magyar.
The Brussels dead end is TISA. In exchange for a few pats on the back and immunity, they will agree to deals with Brussels and fulfill all their demands. They will say yes to war, to funding Ukraine, to settling migrants, and to gender propaganda.
The people of Hungary understand that the oil and gas bought from Russia are paying for the war in Ukraine.
If Russia really is the aggressor, if Russia is challenging civilization, which is already obvious to everyone, then how can you keep relying on its oil and gas, its resources and economic relations? Well, here, it's not a question of whether you like Russia or not. It's simply a rational approach. If this brings nothing to Hungary, if it only results in losses because economic ties with Europe are being destroyed, energy resources, one way or another, will be coming less and less from Russia.
Members of the political opposition believe that the country must finally liberate itself from its long-standing strategic reliance upon Putin.
Orban's media machine and his propaganda methods have essentially blinded society to the moral unacceptability of this friendship with Vladimir Putin. In my opinion, he has managed to influence many Hungarians who, under other circumstances, would never have agreed to such political closeness with Russia.
Orban's popularity is often linked to his control over key media outlets. Putin does the same thing in Russia. Propaganda has become deeply entrenched, and significant resources are being spent to strengthen it.
Running a campaign in such a restricted environment is much more difficult than in a fully democratic system, where there is open space for discussion and media independence is guaranteed.
Let us recall that Hungary has been under a state of emergency since 2015. At present, it has been extended until the spring. The opposition believes that this is a blatant abuse of power aimed at further restricting the powers of parliament and narrowing democratic rights.
This means that everyone expects that Orbán will eventually end his career as prime minister and that someone else, his opponent, currently Péter Magyar, will become the prime minister of Hungary. In any case, even if there is a change of power, it means that it will be much easier for Ukraine and the European Union to negotiate with Hungary and resolve the issues that we need to discuss and settle with them. Or when we need their support, in order for them to back some decision regarding support for Ukraine, funding for Ukraine, or other issues.
Orbán says that he is not afraid of losing the next elections and considers his main opponent not to be the opposition leader Péter Magyar, but Brussels. But the fact remains, it is unlikely that Orbán will leave quietly if, for the first time in 2 decades, he loses an election.
That's all for now. Stay with us to be the first to know what's happening right now. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.